I never imagined that the most humiliating moment of my life would come at my own daughter's wedding. I never thought the child I raised would look me in the eye and destroy me in front of everyone we knew. But what she didn't realize was that I had something that would change everything. And when I finally spoke, her perfect day became something else entirely. Get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't just about betrayal. It's about the moment a mother said enough. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. My name is Patricia. I am 54 years old, and until 3 months ago, I believed that being a good mother meant sacrificing everything. I believed that love was supposed to hurt sometimes. I spent 26 years proving that belief wrong in the most painful way to tell. It started when Sarah was born. Her father walked out when she was 2, leaving me with a toddler, a pile of medical bills, and a job at the local diner that barely covered rent. I worked double shifts 6 days a week. I missed my own birthday parties to pay for hers. I wore the same 3 dresses for 5 years so she could have new clothes for school. When other mothers were getting their nails done or going out with friends, I was home helping with homework or driving her to dance lessons I couldn't afford. Sarah was everything to me. She was smart, beautiful, and ambitious in ways that took my breath away. When she got into college on a partial scholarship, I took out loans for the rest. When she needed money for her sorority, I picked up weekend shifts at a second job. When she graduated and moved across the state for her dream career in marketing, I celebrated, even though it meant seeing her maybe twice a year. Then came David. Sarah met him at work 2 years ago. He was everything I wasn't: polished, wealthy, connected. His family owned a chain of successful restaurants. They lived in a neighborhood where the houses had names instead of numbers. David was charming when he needed to be, but I could see something underneath that smile. Something cold. The first time I met him, he shook my hand and said, "So, you're the famous waitress mom Sarah talks about." He laughed like it was a joke, but his eyes weren't laughing. Sarah just stood there. She didn't correct him. She didn't defend me. She just smiled that nervous smile she'd perfected over the years. I should have said something then. I should have seen the warning signs. But I was so desperate for Sarah to be happy, so afraid of losing the little connection we still had, that I swallowed my pride and pretended it didn't sting. The engagement happened fast. One day, Sarah called to tell me they were serious, and 2 weeks later, she was sending me photos of a ring that probably cost more than my car. The wedding planning started immediately, and I quickly realized I wasn't really part of it. "We're keeping it small and elegant," Sarah said during one of our brief phone calls. "David's family has very specific ideas about how these things should go. I offered to help with whatever I could. I had saved a little money over the years. Nothing compared to what David's family was spending, but enough to contribute something meaningful." Sarah's response was a polite but distant, "Thanks, Mom, but we've got it covered." I wasn't involved in choosing the venue, the flowers, the menu, or even the music. I found out about most of the details the same way distant relatives did, through carefully worded updates Sarah posted on social media. When I asked about my role in the ceremony, she told me I'd be seated in the 3rd row, behind David's extended family and some of their college friends. "But I'm your mother," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "I know, Mom. It's just that David's family is really big, and they have traditions about seating arrangements. You understand, right?" I didn't understand, but I said I did. I always said I did. The dress shopping was the worst part. Sarah invited me, but it was clear I was an afterthought. She brought David's mother, his sister, and 2 of her friends. I was introduced to the boutique staff as my mom, in the same tone you might use to introduce a distant cousin you barely know. I watched Sarah try on dress after dress, each one more beautiful than the last. David's mother, Caroline, had opinions about everything. The neckline was too low. The train was too short. The beading wasn't quite right. Sarah hung on every word, like Caroline was some kind of fashion oracle. When Sarah finally found the dress, she looked absolutely radiant. For a moment, standing there in all that white silk and lace, she looked like the little girl who used to play dress-up in my closet. My eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Mom, don't cry," Sarah said, but not in the sweet way I remembered from her childhood. She sounded embarrassed, like my emotions were inconvenient. Carolyn stepped forward and adjusted the dress slightly. "Perfect," she declared. "This is exactly what I envisioned for the family. The family. Not Sarah's family, David's family." I spent the next 6 months feeling like a stranger in my own daughter's life. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. When I did hear from Sarah, it was usually because she needed something. Could I get the day off to attend the engagement party? Could I pick up some supplies for the bridal shower I wasn't helping to plan? Could I make sure to wear something appropriate to the rehearsal dinner? The rehearsal dinner was held at one of David's family's restaurants. It was beautiful, elegant, and full of people I didn't know. I sat at a table near the back with some of David's distant relatives who spent the entire evening talking about people and places I'd never heard of. Sarah gave a speech about how grateful she was to David's family for welcoming her with open arms. She talked about Caroline like she was a second mother, praising her guidance and wisdom. She mentioned how David's father had given her career advice that changed her trajectory. She thanked David's sister for being the sister she never had. She never mentioned me. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. I talked about watching Sarah grow into an amazing woman and how proud I was of everything she'd accomplished. I wished her and David a lifetime of happiness. The applause was polite but brief. Caroline's speech, which came after mine, got a standing ovation. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with dread. I'd spent more money than I should have on a dress that I hoped would help me fit in with David's crowd. I'd gotten my hair done at a salon for the first time in years. I wanted to look like I belonged, even though I knew I didn't. The ceremony was beautiful. Sarah looked like a princess walking down the aisle. David looked proud and handsome in his expensive suit. The venue was decorated with thousands of white roses and crystals that caught the afternoon light like stars. Everything was perfect. I cried during the vows, partly from joy and partly from grief, for the relationship I'd lost with my daughter. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, I applauded along with everyone else. But when Sarah hugged Caroline after the kiss, holding her longer and tighter than she'd hugged me all day, something inside me cracked. The reception was held in a ballroom that probably cost more than I made in a year. The tables were set with real gold chargers and crystal glasses. The flowers were so elaborate, they looked like art installations. David's family had spared no expense. I was seated at table 12, far from the head table where Sarah and David sat with their wedding party, an immediate family. Carolyn sat to Sarah's right. I sat between David's great aunt, who spent the entire dinner complaining about her arthritis, and a family friend who kept talking about his boat. The speeches began after dinner. David's best man told funny stories about college. Sarah's maid of honor, Caroline's niece, talked about their shopping trips and girls' weekends. David's father gave a touching speech about gaining a daughter. Caroline welcomed Sarah to the family with words so warm and loving that I felt my heart break a little more. Then it was my turn. I'd written something short and sweet, just a few words about love and happiness and how beautiful the day had been. I was walking toward the microphone when it happened. Sarah stood up suddenly, her face flushed with wine and something else, something harder. "Actually," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "I don't think we need any more speeches tonight." I stopped walking. The room got quiet. Caroline looked confused. David looked uncomfortable. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I just wanted to say a few words." She walked toward me, and for a moment I thought she was going to hug me, maybe apologize for the awkwardness. Instead, she looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, you've done enough today. Just sit down." The words hit me like a physical blow. People were staring. Some were whispering. I felt my face burn with shame and confusion. "I don't understand," I whispered. Sarah's expression was cold, colder than I'd ever seen it. "You don't understand a lot of things, like how to dress appropriately, like when to stay quiet, like when you're not wanted." The room was completely silent now. Even the staff had stopped what they were doing to watch. My hands started shaking. "Sarah, please," I said, my voice barely audible. "It's your wedding day. Let's not do this here." That's when she did it. That's when my daughter, the child I'd given everything for, raised her hand and slapped me across the face. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Then she laughed. It wasn't a laugh of joy or even embarrassment. It was cruel, calculated, designed to humiliate. "There," she said. "Now, maybe you'll get the message." The silence that followed was deafening. 300 guests sat frozen in their chairs, crystal glasses halfway to lips, forks suspended over expensive plates. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The left side of my face burned where her hand had connected, but the pain in my chest was so much worse. I looked around the room and saw expressions I'll never forget. Some faces showed shock, others disgust. A few of David's relatives looked satisfied, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Caroline's mouth hung open, but I could see something behind her eyes that looked almost pleased. This was what they'd wanted all along. They'd wanted me gone, erased, removed from Sarah's perfect new life. Sarah stood there, breathing hard, her wedding dress pristine and beautiful, her face twisted into something I didn't recognize. This wasn't my little girl. This wasn't the child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who made me Mother's Day cards with crayon hearts and misspelled words. This was a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "Sarah," David said quietly, reaching for her arm. Even he looked uncomfortable with what had just happened. She shook him off. "No, David." She needed to hear this. "She's been embarrassing us all day with her cheap dress and her desperate attempts to fit in. Look at her. She doesn't belong here." The words kept coming, each one a knife to my heart. She talked about how I'd held her back her whole life, how my poverty had been a source of shame, how she'd had to work twice as hard to overcome the stigma of having a waitress for a mother. She said David's family had shown her what real class looked like, what real love looked like. "Caroline has been more of a mother to me in 2 years than you've been in 26, she said, her voice getting louder. "At least she knows how to act in public. At least she doesn't embarrass me every time she opens her mouth." I stood there taking it, absorbing every cruel word, like I'd trained myself to do for years. Part of me wanted to run, to flee from this nightmare and never look back. Part of me wanted to scream, to defend myself, to remind everyone in that room of the sacrifices I'd made. But mostly, I just felt hollow, like something essential had been carved out of me and thrown away. That man at table 8 when I saw him, an older, someone I didn't recognize, was looking at me with something that might have been sympathy. He was well-dressed, distinguished, with silver hair and kind eyes, while everyone else stared at me like I was a car wreck. He looked at me like I was human. He stood up slowly and started walking toward the head table. The room's attention shifted to him, and Sarah finally stopped her verbal assault. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent ballroom. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think there's been a misunderstanding." David looked confused. "Uncle Robert, what are you doing?" Uncle Robert, David's uncle. I'd heard the name, but never met him. He lived somewhere far away, traveled extensively, only came to major family events. "I'm correcting a very serious error," Robert said calmly. He looked directly at Sarah, his expression stern. "Young lady, you just assaulted and humiliated the woman who raised you, in front of 300 witnesses, at your own wedding." Sarah's face went pale. "Uncle Robert, you don't understand. She was trying to." "I understand perfectly," he cut her off. "I've been watching this circus all evening. I've seen how your new family treats your mother. I've seen how you've adopted their cruelty as your own." He turned to address the room, his voice projecting without effort. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Robert Caldwell. I'm David's uncle, and I've been part of this family for 63 years. I've seen a lot of weddings, a lot of celebrations, but I've never seen anything as disgusting as what just happened here." Caroline stood up, her face flushed. "Robert, please, this is a family matter." "You're absolutely right, Caroline. It is a family matter, which is why I'm going to tell this family exactly what I think of their behavior tonight." The room was electric with tension. I could see David's father trying to signal Robert to stop, but the old man ignored him completely. "Patricia," he said, turning to me, "may I have a word with you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He walked over and gently took my arm, leading me toward the microphone Sarah had tried to deny me. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, "I'd like to tell you about the woman you just watched get humiliated by her own daughter." Sarah tried to interrupt, but Robert held up a hand that silenced her immediately. "Patricia worked 16-hour days for 24 years to raise that girl. She wore the same clothes for years, so Sarah could have new ones. She ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, so Sarah could have dance lessons. She took out loans she couldn't afford, so Sarah could go to college. She worked weekends at a second job to help pay for wedding expenses she was never allowed to help plan." The room was completely still. I could see people looking at me differently now, some with shame, others with understanding. "And tonight," Robert continued, "you all watched her get slapped and berated by the child she sacrificed everything for. You watched a mother get told she doesn't belong at her own daughter's wedding. Some of you even seemed to enjoy it." His voice grew harder, more pointed. "Let me tell you something about belonging. Patricia belongs here more than any of us. She's the only person in this room who loved Sarah before she was successful, before she was wealthy, before she was useful. She loved her when love was all she had to give." I felt tears starting to fall, but for the first time all day, they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of gratitude that someone, finally, had seen me. "Caroline," Robert said, turning to David's mother, "you've spent 2 years poisoning this girl against her own mother. You've convinced her that money equals worth, that class means cruelty. You've turned love into a competition and made sure Patricia could never win. Caroline's face was bright red. Robert, how dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Point out that you've been systematically destroying a relationship between a mother and daughter, that you've been so threatened by Patricia's genuine love that you had to replace it with your own conditional version? He turned back to the microphone, addressing the room again. David, Sarah, congratulations on your wedding. I hope you'll be very happy together. But I want you to remember this night. I want you to remember the moment you chose cruelty over kindness, status over love, image over substance. Sarah was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, but her tears looked more like frustration than regret. Patricia, Robert said, turning to me one final time, you raised a daughter who was capable of greatness. It's not your fault she chose this instead. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the shocked quiet of people watching a spectacle. This was the heavy quiet of people being forced to examine their own consciences. I looked out at the room, at all these well-dressed people who had watched my humiliation with such interest. I thought about everything I wanted to say, all the hurt and anger and disappointment I'd been swallowing for months. Then I walked to the microphone. My hands were steadier than I expected as I adjusted the microphone. 300 faces stared back at me, some curious, others uncomfortable, a few openly hostile. Sarah had stopped crying and was watching me with something that looked like fear. Good. She should be afraid. I cleared my throat and began to speak, my voice calm and clear in a way that surprised even me. Thank you, Robert, for your kind words, and thank you all for witnessing what just happened here tonight, because what you saw was not just a daughter disrespecting her mother. What you saw was the end of something that should have ended a long time ago. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room. Some people were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, sensing that something important was about to happen. Sarah, you're absolutely right about one thing. I am just a waitress. I do work at a diner. I have worn the same 3 dresses for years. And yes, I've been embarrassed more times than I can count by people who thought my poverty made me less than human. Sarah's mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to interrupt, but I continued. But what you don't understand, what none of you seem to understand, is that being poor doesn't make someone worthless. Working with your hands doesn't make you inferior. And sacrificing everything for your child doesn't make you pathetic. I turned to look directly at Caroline, who was gripping her champagne glass so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Caroline, you've spent 2 years teaching my daughter that love is conditional, that it's something you earn through good behavior and proper appearances. You've shown her that mothers are replaceable, that blood means nothing compared to bank accounts. Caroline started to speak, but I held up my hand, and surprisingly, she stopped. But here's what you never told her. Here's the part of the story you left out. Love isn't supposed to come with a price tag. Real love, the kind I've given Sarah her entire life, doesn't disappear when someone embarrasses you. It doesn't evaporate when someone wears the wrong dress or uses the wrong fork. I looked back at Sarah, who was now staring at the floor. You want to know what real class looks like, Sarah? Real class is working 3 jobs to pay for your daughter's dreams. Real class is celebrating her success, even when it takes her away from you. Real class is showing up to a wedding where you're not wanted because you love someone more than you love your own pride. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ice clinking in people's drinks as their hands trembled slightly. But you know what isn't classy? Slapping your mother at your own wedding. Humiliating the woman who gave you everything in front of people who gave you nothing but money. Choosing people who will abandon you the moment you're no longer useful over the one person who loved you when you had nothing to offer. I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside my chest. The knot of shame and hurt that had been living there for months was loosening, being replaced by something cleaner and stronger. David, I want you to know that I tried to like you. I tried to see what Sarah saw in you. But you've spent 2 years allowing your family to treat me like garbage. You've watched them poison my relationship with my daughter, and you've said nothing. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man you are. David's face was red, but he didn't respond. His father looked like he wanted to stand up and leave, but he was trapped by social convention and curiosity about what would come next. And to everyone else in this room, thank you for showing me exactly who you are. Thank you for making it crystal clear that I don't belong in your world, because honestly, I wouldn't want to. I turned back to Sarah one final time. She was looking at me now, her eyes wide and uncertain. Sarah, I want you to remember this moment 20 years from now. I want you to remember the night you chose these people over the woman who loved you unconditionally. Because someday, when you're older and maybe wiser, you're going to realize what you threw away tonight. My voice caught slightly, but I pushed through it. I want you to remember that when you were sick with pneumonia at 7 years old, I held you all night in the emergency room because we couldn't afford a private room. Caroline wasn't there. When you cried because the kids at school made fun of your secondhand clothes, I worked overtime for 3 weeks to buy you that dress you wanted for the school dance. Caroline wasn't there. When you got your heart broken for the first time at 16, who stayed up all night with you eating ice cream and watching movies? It wasn't Caroline. Sarah's lip was trembling now, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl I remembered. But tonight, when you needed someone to teach you about kindness and loyalty and love, Caroline was here, and she taught you to slap your mother in front of strangers. Congratulations, sweetheart. You learned the lesson perfectly. I stepped back from the microphone, but I wasn't finished. There was something else I needed to say. Something that had been building inside me for months. There's one more thing you all should know, I said, my voice carrying clearly without amplification. Something Sarah doesn't know. Something I've never told anyone. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sarah looked up sharply, confusion replacing the defiance in her eyes. 3 months ago, I received a call from a lawyer. It seems my great-aunt Millicent, who I hadn't seen since I was a child, passed away and left me something in her will. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age and bearing an official-looking seal. She left me her house, a beautiful Victorian home in Charleston, worth about $400,000. She also left me her investment portfolio, which has grown to just over $600,000 over the past 30 years. The silence in the room became electric. I could see Caroline's face go white, could see David's father lean forward in his chair. Sarah's mouth fell open. I've been sitting on this inheritance for 3 months, trying to decide what to do with it. I kept thinking about Sarah, about how this money could help her, how it could secure her future. I thought about paying off her student loans, maybe helping with a down payment on a house. I looked directly at my daughter, who was now staring at me like she'd never seen me before. But you know what stopped me? It wasn't pride. It wasn't anger. It was the slow realization that giving you money wouldn't fix what was broken between us. It would just be another Band-Aid on a wound that needed real healing. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my purse. So tonight, after watching you choose cruelty over love, after listening to you tell me I don't belong in your life, I've made my decision. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling that lawyer. I'm donating every penny of that inheritance to a scholarship fund for children of single mothers. Kids whose parents work multiple jobs, who know what it means to sacrifice, who understand that love isn't about money. Sarah stood up so fast, her chair fell backward. Mom, wait, you can't. That's not fair. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. For the first time all evening, I had her complete attention. Fair, I repeated softly. Was it fair when you told me I didn't belong here? Was it fair when you slapped me in front of 300 people? Was it fair when you chose these strangers over the woman who gave birth to you? Sarah's face crumpled, and suddenly she looked very young and very lost. But Mom, I didn't know about the money. If I had known, if you had known what? You would have treated me better. You would have loved me more. I shook my head sadly. Sarah, that's exactly the problem. Love shouldn't have a price tag. Respect shouldn't be conditional on someone's bank balance. I looked around the room one final time, taking in the shocked faces, the whispered conversations, the uncomfortable shifting in expensive chairs. Caroline, thank you for showing me what conditional love looks like. David, thank you for showing me what kind of man puts money before family. And Sarah, thank you for showing me that sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is walk away. I picked up my purse, smoothed down my dress, and started walking toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear Sarah calling my name, her voice breaking with tears and panic. I could hear David trying to calm her down, could hear Caroline's sharp whisper telling them both to let me go. But I didn't turn around. For the first time in 26 years, I kept walking. The parking lot was nearly empty when I finally made it outside, my heels clicking against the asphalt in the cool evening air. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my car keys, the adrenaline from what had just happened making everything feel surreal. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos coming from inside the ballroom. Raised voices, chairs scraping, the general commotion of 300 people trying to process what they just witnessed. I sat in my car for a moment, engine off, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The left side of my face was still red from where Sarah had struck me. But somehow, I looked different, stronger, like I'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. My phone started buzzing. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, then again, then again. I turned it off and dropped it in my purse. Whatever she had to say now, I wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe I never would be. The drive home took 45 minutes, and I spent every one of them replaying the evening in my head. The look on Sarah's face when I mentioned the inheritance. The way Caroline had gone pale when she realized her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. The shocked silence that followed my announcement about the scholarship fund. But mostly, I thought about Robert, David's uncle, who had seen what everyone else chose to ignore, who had stood up when it would have been easier to stay seated, who had reminded a room full of people that cruelty dressed up in fancy clothes was still just cruelty. When I got to my small apartment, I sat on my couch, still wearing my expensive dress, and did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Jenny in Oregon. Patricia, Jesus, it's almost midnight there. What's wrong? I told her everything. The whole humiliating, painful, liberating story. Jenny listened without interrupting, making only small sounds of sympathy and outrage at all the right moments. I'm proud of you, she said when I finished. It's about damn time. I might have just lost my daughter forever, I said, the reality of it hitting me for the first time. Honey, you lost your daughter months ago. Tonight, you just stopped pretending otherwise. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. The first thing I did was call the lawyer in Charleston. Mr. Henderson was surprised to hear from me so early on a Sunday. But he was patient as I explained what I wanted to do with the inheritance. A scholarship fund is a wonderful idea, Mrs. Morrison. Very generous. But are you absolutely certain? This is a substantial amount of money. You could live very comfortably for the rest of your life. I'm certain, I said. I've been poor my whole life, Mr. Henderson. A little more money won't change who I am, but it might change who someone else becomes. We talked for another 20 minutes about the details, about how to structure the fund, about the criteria for recipients. I wanted it to go to kids who understood what it meant to work for something, who knew the value of sacrifice, who wouldn't take opportunity for granted. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: purpose, not the exhausting, endless purpose of serving someone else's dreams, but the clean, clear purpose of making something meaningful with my own choices. My phone had been buzzing all morning. 17 missed calls from Sarah, 12 from David, even 3 from Caroline. There were text messages, too, ranging from Sarah's tearful apologies to David's demands that I call him back immediately to discuss this misunderstanding. I deleted them all without reading past the first few words. Monday morning at the diner was different. Word had somehow gotten out about what happened at the wedding. Small towns are like that. News travels fast, especially when it's dramatic. But instead of the pity or judgment I expected, my coworkers looked at me with something like admiration. "Heard you gave those rich folks a piece of your mind," said Rita, the other waitress who'd worked the morning shift for 15 years. "About time somebody put them in their place." Even my boss, Mr. Kowalski, seemed impressed. "Take Tuesday off," he told me. "You've earned it." I used Tuesday to drive to Charleston and see my inheritance for the first time. The house was even more beautiful than the photographs. A 3-story Victorian with wraparound porches and original hardwood floors. It needed work, paint, and repairs, and new fixtures, but the bones were solid. Standing in the front parlor, looking out at the garden that would bloom come spring, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. That evening, I sat on the front porch swing with a glass of sweet tea and called Mr. Henderson again. We'd been talking about the scholarship fund, but now I had a different idea. What if instead of just funding scholarships, we created a place, somewhere young mothers could come when they need help, need support, need to remember they're worth something? The idea grew as we talked. A halfway house, a support center, a place where women like I used to be could find resources and community, and most importantly, dignity. We could use the Charleston house as headquarters, renovate it to accommodate counseling rooms, childcare space, maybe even temporary housing. "It's ambitious," Mr. Henderson said, "but doable, especially with your great-aunt's investment portfolio as backing." "Let's call it Millicent's Place," I said, thinking of the great-aunt I barely remembered, but who had somehow seen fit to change my life, in honor of the woman who gave me a second chance. Wednesday brought a surprise. Robert Caldwell called me at the diner. "Patricia, I hope you don't mind me tracking you down. I got your number from the wedding planner." "Of course not. Thank you for what you did Saturday night. I should have done more. I should have stopped that whole circus before it started." He paused. "I wanted you to know that I've had some very frank conversations with my family since the wedding." I waited, curious but not hopeful. People like David's family didn't change overnight, if they changed at all. Caroline has been asked to apologize to you, publicly. David has been told in no uncertain terms that his behavior was unacceptable. And Sarah, well, Sarah is learning some hard truths about the people she's chosen to surround herself with. I appreciate that, Robert. I really do. But I'm not looking for apologies anymore. I understand. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in David's family supported what happened. Some of us remember what real values look like. After I hung up, I thought about values, about the lessons we teach and the ones we learn. I'd spent 26 years teaching Sarah that love meant sacrifice, that mothers existed to serve their children's dreams. Maybe it was time for her to learn a different lesson. Maybe it was time for her to understand that actions have consequences, that cruelty has costs, that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Thursday evening, I was at the Charleston house measuring windows for curtains when I heard a car pull up outside. Through the front window, I saw a familiar figure walking up the path. Sarah, alone, looking smaller somehow in jeans and a simple sweater instead of her wedding finery. She knocked hesitantly on the front door. I debated not answering, but curiosity won out. When I opened the door, she looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair unwashed, her face pale and drawn. "Mom," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "Sarah." We stood there looking at each other for a long moment. I didn't invite her in, didn't make it easy. She was going to have to work for this conversation. I've been driving around for 2 hours, trying to figure out what to say to you. And what did you come up with? Sometimes the hardest truth is admitting when you've lost someone you love. That night changed everything between Sarah and me. And 6 months later, we still haven't found our way back to each other. But I found something else, something I didn't even know I was looking for. I found my voice, my worth, my power to say enough. Millicent's Place opened last month, and we've already helped 12 women remember they deserve better than settling for scraps of love. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, know this: you are worth more than their conditional affection. Your love has value, even when they can't see it. Thanks for listening to my story. And remember to subscribe if it touched your heart. Your voice matters too.